Right, well thank heavens just about everyone else has buggered off because I was sick of all of those people. Miserable bastards writing in the visitors book about how there's no campsites. Tough shit. They'd flooded. Anyway, here we are at Kinchega Homestead and we're going to have a look around the shearing shed this afternoon. Pretty big deal. Alright, in front of you can see a steam train. Well, not a steam train, a steam engine. There's no train tracks out here. Well, there are train tracks, but they're a long way away. Anyway, this was, the official story is that this was put here in the 1880s to power the first powered shears, which were power-driven handpieces colloquially known as bog-eyes. That's the official story. The truth of the matter is that it was actually put here to power the first crystal meth factory in Australia in the 1880s. It was very successful. And on a related note, this is the engine room. As you can see, it's a room and it had something to do with engines. This is where the room where frenetic dancing activity at the big day out takes place gets its name. It's called the engine room and it's named after this. Inside the engine room you can see there's plenty of room to put a couple of decks and mix the tunes. Don't know what this is. Anyway. As you can imagine, in the 1800s, a structure of this kind was pretty substantial. It was built of local pine logs, but being such a substantial structure, demand to get into it was pretty high. In fact, thousands of sheep would queue up and hang around in these pens for weeks on end before they were finally allowed to come up the queue here and go up the ramp and get past security, and eventually the door bitch should let them in. It was pretty tough, but there were some exclusive members who'd be able to get past this queue, but it's had a major influence on the modern entertainment industry, I can tell you now. And once you're up the ramp, this is the shearing equivalent of the cloakroom. This is where you'd sort of make sure you left your goods so that they could be looked after while you went and sweated it out on the floor with a few burly blokes. So this is where all the action happened, and before there were disco biscuits, before there was shuffling, there was shearing. Now if you look over here you'll notice a structure that's up on the wall that's a kind of power source. The official story is that this went from the engine room to power the shears, and of course the shears were attached to this. And but we all know really what this was about was the early predecessor to the disco ball and the light show. Pretty interesting for the 1800s. It was a fairly dynamic environment, the shearing shed, and in fact here is where the sheep would hang around until one of the shearers had had enough of another sheep and he'd come bursting through these doors here like this, grab one of the sheep from in here and take it out here to be fleeced. Not a lot's changed in the entertainment industry. It was one of the more successful establishments of the time. In fact, over 6 million sheep were fleeced in this place. This is the games room. In fact, this is a very, very early version of a colonial Australian pool table. Unfortunately, they hadn't yet designed pockets and stuff like that, and the rules are a bit obscure. Nonetheless, it provided many hours of entertainment when people had had enough on the shearing room floor. As always, the safety of patrons was paramount. And as you can see here, there are a number of private booths where people would gather to dispose of the early predecessor of rack, as in snuff, and engage in other nefarious activities, much like the young folk of today do. Another significant contribution of the era which remains important to the nighttime activities of today's youth is the press. The modern pill press is a little more sophisticated than this, but as you can see, this would have produced fairly large items that would have had everyone pinging for a good number of hours at a time. Very significant innovation for the time. And as you can see, the advance from a wooden press to a metal press made things a fair bit more efficient. Note the crank handle. Note the use of the term crank. The other important thing that's an important contribution is the dust flocker. Now the dust flocker is what it sounds like, it flocks dust. How amazing is that? As you can see, like any club, there are exclusive areas that only the very privileged can access. It's a bit like the nostalgia at the old Razor Club. There are some pictures of some very happy punters from the time, and some of the goings on the shed floor. And there's the place you queue up to get in, and there's the barge where the pressed pills were put in big bags and taken to port and shipped to Amsterdam, I believe. And finally, after a big night on it, there was always a demand for people to get home by a safe method, and so there was a variety of forms of transport available depending on your means. There's one of the more luxury items. And there wasn't only your private transport in the form of buggies, but there was also your public transport, and this is the first version, promulgation of the Night Rider bus. As you can see, it's fairly substantial and operated on a basis of taking people home from the sheds late at night. There's also an array of paraphernalia for those who had stranger habits. There's also an array of other games that people used to play after a hard night on it. God knows what that was for. Yeah, well, times have changed to some extent, but you know, people still seek their diversions. And just as a postscript, you may be wondering what sort of impact this all had on packaging and sales of packaged alcohol. Well, they were very responsible and to this day maintain practices of recycling glass, plastic and aluminium. Another great contribution that Kinchega Station nightclub made to the modern entertainment industry. And of course the recycling program was important because they really didn't want to go about littering the bush with all of their bottles and cans and stuff like that, when instead of doing that they could actually totally destroy the bush using contraptions like this. Awesome, isn't it? Well, here we are at the end of the tour. I hope you've enjoyed your look around Kinchega Station nightclub. It's been fascinating, and I hope you've understood the great contribution that this has made to the modern entertainment industry. We'll be back in another location soon.